Some libraries have closed, fully shuttered in this country. There are towns that no longer have a library because the citizens were so angry that their library carried my book in particular.
This is a special edition of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley for Bookmarked, the Under the Radar Book Club. My guests are authors Jodi Picoult and Maia Kobabe, two authors whose books are at the top of many banned book lists. And I want to start quite simply with the material that you both wrote. So, for you, Jodi, in 19 minutes, what led you to write that story?
Oh, it came out in 2007, and at the time, my kids were in middle and high school, and school shootings were rampant, as was bullying. And I wanted to write a book for the kids who are bullied, and I wanted to help them feel seen. And I wanted readers to be able to understand that just as it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to fail a child. That was kind of the impetus for the book.
Maia, more personal for you, I'm imagining.
I wrote my debut memoir in huge part to connect to my family. I am non-binary and trans, and when I was first starting to come out, which was around 2016 to 2017, I was having a lot of conversations with people, close friends, acquaintances, parents, aunts, uncles, who are very supportive and saying things like, we love you and we support you, but also we have no idea what you're talking about when you're talking about gender, because I just hadn't thought about it deeply before I started bringing it up literally all the time. And I felt like I kept trying to ask for things like people to use non-binary pronouns for me or what non-binary even meant, and being completely unable to get my point across in conversation. And finally, it got to the point where I was like, I just have to sit down and write about this. And in many ways, the book is like a very long letter to my parents and my family.
Well, I'll lead off the next question to you, Maia. What did you see at the who did you see at the outset, as the audience? Now, you've mentioned that you wanted to reach to your family, but beyond your family.
I definitely hoped that the book would also be useful, like even a useful tool to other trans and non-binary, gender non-conforming folks who were also struggling to have these conversations. My hope was that people could take this book to their parents, or if they were parents, their children, or their loved ones, and say, hey, I feel this way too, or I relate to this page, but not this page so much. And that it could be a conversation opener.
Jody, for you, who did you envision as the audience?
Pretty much my normal audience, which spans a lot of ages, all genders really. And I know that I've had a lot of teens who've read it. The book when it came out was curriculum in a lot of school districts, which was amazing. Um, but a lot of my adult fans as well. I mean, really, I didn't have an audience in mind. I really just wrote the story I wanted and needed to write at that moment.
So, Maya, when Genderqueer came out, what was the initial response, and did it right away, start to grab attention from a lot of folks, or was it kind of a slow burn?
It got picked up steam pretty quickly. I think that it was very immediately supported by librarians, which is really incredible. I did some of the early promotional events were heavily attended by librarians, and almost every librarian who, stood in my early signing line said something like, I'm so excited to put this in my teen section, or I know like one specific teen or what library patron that I want to like hand this to directly. And I think that kind of early librarian, support, early librarian recognition really kind of got the ball rolling. And my experience for the first year and a half with this book was just absolutely lovely. I mean, amazing, warm, like heartfelt reader responses was my like first kind of experience of writing this.
Give me an example of one.
I had people messaging me, mostly on Instagram, saying things like, I have never related to a book before in my life. I've never before seen a book that reflected my experience in this world. And reading this book makes me feel less alone. And reading this book makes me feel like it just opens up possibilities for my future.
All right, back to you, Jody. Same thing. When the book initially came out, you have legions of followers already. You're, been out there with other books, and so I imagine those would be the first people to embrace it. But beyond that, what was the initial reaction?
Um, The book was a huge success. It won awards for young adult literature in Illinois, in Texas, in Iowa, in New Hampshire, many of those places where it's now banned like crazy. But I think what really struck me the most were the number of emails that I got from readers, from kids who said, um, you know, I didn't realize it, but I I'm bullying kids in my school by not sticking up for them. And probably the most poignant letters I've ever received as a writer. I have had probably about 100 kids write to me and say, I was going to bring a gun to school, but I read
Wow.
your book and I realized I'm not the only person who feels this way.
Woof.
Yeah.
That's an
Wow.
intense reaction. Wow, Jodi. So now, when and where then was your first challenge? Was the first challenge to your book? I'll start with you, Maya. And maybe were you aware of the first challenge?
I think that the very first challenge that happened, I actually wasn't aware of, and I heard of a slightly later challenge as the first one that hit my radar. Um, the first one that hit my radar was when it was challenged in Fairfax County, Virginia, in a school district over there, and there was a parent who was reading passages from the book completely out of context and saying very outrageous things about it. That was filmed, and then that little video clip went viral online. So that's what kind of made it to my attention, and this was in September of 2021. There had been a couple of earlier challenges than that that were a little quieter, and I think one of them was in Huntington Beach, California, which I read about later in the American Library Association's annual sort of report on book bans. But that one didn't hit social media in the same way. So the first one I heard about was one that went viral on social media.
What was your response when that
I mean,
viral video was going around?
at first I was just like, I don't need to pay attention to this. This isn't my business. It was very like, just don't pay attention to haters, right? Don't listen to the noise. But that first challenge was start with like the first domino of an unbelievable wave of challenges that I am still seeing and facing to this day. And that first one where I was kind of like, I don't need to listen to one angry parent who clearly hasn't even read the book and is not, caring about what I have to say. That one sparked copycat challenges with people using very similar language right at the beginning of the kind of Moms for Liberty era, in basically everywhere. It was challenged in Virginia, then it was challenged somewhere else in Virginia, and then it was like Rhode Island, and then it was Florida, and then it was Ohio, and then it was Alaska, and then it was so many that I couldn't keep track. And it was so many challenges that even though the challenges against genderqueer only really started in September of 2021, there were so many between September and December that it was the most challenged book of the year because they just came so quick and so fast in those last couple of months.
So, a couple of things I want to share with my listeners. First, 2021 was kind of a resurgence because there had been books banned before, but in terms of organized book banning, that was really the year where it kicked off. Your book being one of the ones that was targeted, and these are
Yes.
organized book banning groups. Moms for Liberty, in case people have not heard that title before, it's a group, mostly women, who have as a mission to go around to various communities and get certain books banned. So that is there. This is not, I'm not, you know, misspeaking. This is their mission. They're very clear about it, and they've been pretty successful in many places, and certainly were involved in a book banning event here in Massachusetts as well. So, Jodi, I want to come back to you with the same question about when were you first aware of it and your reaction?
The very first time someone spoke out against 19 Minutes was the year that it was published. And like I said, it was curriculum in a lot of high schools. And a parent went to a school board meeting. It was in New Hampshire, actually, in the state where I live, and read aloud a passage from page 313, in which a date rape occurs. And that is a very intentional passage. It's in there because, as I said, the book looks at all different forms of bullying, and this is one of them. And the word erection is used on that page. And apparently, I guess they felt that a lot of high school kids had never heard that word, didn't know what it was. And this parent wanted to speak out about it and decided to read this out loud. And there was so much backlash against him that he wound up being taken out of that school board meeting. So that was back in 2007. So now, fast forward to 2022, and I think it should be also stated that I was late to the book banning party. Like you said, it really started in 2021, and it started with challenges to LGBTQIA literature and to literature that was by and about Black individuals or Brown individuals. Then they started targeting, they meaning Moms for Liberty, what they called mature content or anything that they deemed sexually inappropriate. And that was where 19 Minutes fell into the mix. They were not banning it because it is about gun violence. They don't really care about that. They were banning it because of page 313. And I was first made aware of it, ironically, when I was working over in England. I was writing the libretto for a musical adaptation of The Book Thief, which is about fascism in Nazi Germany. And I was watching a prop book being burned on stage by an actor playing a Nazi when I was notified that my book had been banned. It just felt so on the nose, you know. And after that, I didn't, you know, I was like, oh, okay, that's odd. But after that, a few months later in Martin County, Florida, one parent banned, she wanted to ban 92 books at once, and 20 of them were mine. She admitted that she had never read any of the books. That didn't seem to matter. They pulled the books off the shelves immediately. And that was really the beginning for me of my books being banned en masse across the country.
Hmm. If you're just tuning in, this is a special edition of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley for Bookmarked, the Under the Radar Book Club. My guests are authors Jodi Picoult and Maia Kobabe, two authors whose books are at the top of many banned book lists. This episode is also part of our year-long series Unbound Pages, detailing the anti-book banning movement in America. So I want my listeners to hear from both of you on the page. So I've picked a couple of excerpts that we can use. And Jodi, I thought I'd get you to read from 19 Minutes, page 21. And you can set it up if you want, or I can, exactly where this moment happens.
Okay, you just cut out a little there, but I'm going to read to you.
Oh, page 21. If you'd like to set it up,
Sure.
Go right ahead, or I can.
Yeah, so this is it's from almost the very beginning of the book, which really does start with the shooting at a small New Hampshire town at a high school. So this is basically the detective's point of view as he comes into the scene. Chaos was a constellation of students running out of the school and trampling the injured. A boy holding a handmade sign in an upstairs window that read, "Help us." Two girls hugging each other and sobbing. Chaos was blood melting pink on the snow. It was the drip of parents that turned into a stream and then a raging river, screaming out the names of their missing children. Chaos was a TV camera in your face, not enough ambulances, not enough officers, and no plan for how to react when the world as you knew it went to pieces. Patrick pulled halfway onto the sidewalk and grabbed his bulletproof vest from the back of the car. Already adrenaline pulsed through him, making the edges of his vision swim and his senses more acute. He found Chief O'Rourke standing with a megaphone in the middle of the melee. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet," the chief said. "SOU's on its way." Patrick didn't give a damn about the Special Operations Unit. By the time the SWAT team got here, 100 more shots might be fired, a kid might be killed. He drew his gun. "I'm going in." "The hell you are. That's not protocol." "There is no protocol for this," Patrick snapped. "You can fire me later." As he raced up the steps to the school, he was vaguely aware of two other patrol officers, bucking the chief's commands and joining him in the fray. Patrick directed them each down a different hallway, and then he himself pushed through the double doors, past students who were shoving each other in an effort to get outside. Fire alarms blared so loudly that Patrick had to strain to hear the gunshots. He grabbed the coat of a boy streaking past him. "Who is it?" he yelled. "Who's shooting?" The kid shook his head, speechless, and wrenched away. Patrick watched him run crazily down the hallway, open the door, burst into a rectangle of sunlight. Students funneled around him as if he were a stone in a river. Smoke billowed and burned his eyes. Patrick heard another staccato of gunshots, and he had to restrain himself from running toward them blindly. "How many of them?" he cried as a girl ran by. I don't know." The boy beside her turned around and looked at Patrick, torn between offering knowledge and getting the hell out of there. "It's a kid. He's shooting everyone."
That's my guest, Jodi Picoult, reading from her novel, 19 Minutes, one of the most banned books in the country. Now, over to you, Maia Kobabe. Your book is genderqueer and it's a memoir. So, this is a very personal story. I'd love you to read from page 19. One other thing I want to mention to my listeners is that genderqueer is a graphic novel because you're a cartoonist. So, there are pictures on the page, many pictures on the page, and there's also copy. So, you're reading the copy around the pictures on these pages.
That's right. There is also an audiobook version, which we did as much as we could to make it work without the pictures that readers can look up. So the scene here is also from near the beginning of my book, and it's set during elementary school. And there's a panel of a child version of myself in first grade stealing a basketball from an older boy on a basketball court. "Hey," the older boy said, "that was mine." As I run away, he yells, "What even are you, a boy or a girl?" I was glad that he couldn't tell. It wasn't unusual for boys to have long hair. In my class of 18 students at a Waldorf elementary school, 4 boys had hair that brushed their shoulders. I remember a field trip I took with my class in 3rd grade. We were visiting a farm next to a river. It was a hot afternoon, and our teacher said we could take off our shoes and socks to wade. My dad was one of the trip chaperones, and he took off his shirt to sit in the sun. I took my shirt off too and walked in the shallows just wearing my shorts. Some of my classmates noticed. "Look, Maya took her shirt off like a boy." "What? Haha." My teacher intervened. "Maya dear, you should put your shirt back on." "Why?" You need to. Come, put it back on now." I walked back to put my shirt on again, but I didn't feel like I had done anything wrong. It was everyone else being silly, not me.
That's my guest, Maia Kobabe, reading from Genderqueer, a Memoir. Back to you, Jodi. I just want to note that, to my knowledge, the reasons given for most of the bans and challenges, you mentioned this earlier, don't have to do with the violence, the gun violence itself. And often, both of you have said, and we should mention it, people don't read the whole book or read the book. They just hear passages and sort of leap on those passages. How do you respond to that? Because in both of your instances, and this is for any author, you've carefully laid out the story and it knits together in a way that makes sense if you follow the whole story. But if you only take excerpts, you're not going to get it.
Hmm.
How do you respond to people just sort of lifting the excerpts and then saying this has to go because it's not appropriate?
In my opinion, it's not much different than an evangelical Christian cherry picking from the Bible, right? And so saying this is one particular quote that I'm going to use, although it has nothing to do with today's world or anything like that, but it's going to enforce what I believe. Um, like you said, when we craft a book, we're crafting an entirety, and to pull out one piece of it is so facetious and so wrong, because it undermines, I think, the message of what we're trying to do as authors. Um, you know, the other thing it does is give a false sense of what that message is. You know, when you are pulling out one image from Maya's book or one passage from my book and saying, look at this filth, look at this trash, you are negating, first of all, the context of why we included that in the text, and also the overall message and every other bit of that book that is meant to make a reader feel or learn or understand.
And back to you, Maia. This is your story.
It
Let's
is.
start there. So for someone to question your own story is a little challenging for you, the author, I'm going to say, to begin with. But what's key to your story is the questioning and the journey of the questioning,
Yes.
um, which is the context and the point. And somehow along the way, many parts of your book have been lifted out of context of that journey. So your response to that?
Yeah, there are multiple times where I've read in articles a book challenger, a Moms for Their Liberty type, literally bragging that they haven't read my book before they want to challenge it. The people who are banning books are not readers. And in many ways, these book challenges, they are about books, but they have a larger goal, which is that people who are challenging books are actually trying to delegitimize and weaken people's trust in the institutions of public libraries and public education. So the books in some ways are actually just an excuse to basically attack librarians, attack teachers, attack public education, and just weaken our institutions of literacy and learning. And I think that they pull individual passages out, passages they think might be inflammatory or that, again, taken out of context, might seem more extreme than they are in the course of the story, because they're trying to use them to rile up people's emotions, people who have not had time to read the entire book as a whole. And in this country, we have very specific definitions of what legally in a court of law can be declared obscene. There is a test. It's called the Miller test, and it has three parts. And one of them is that the work has to be taken as a whole. You cannot take 2 minutes out of a movie or one line out of a song or one paragraph out of a book and declare a work obscene based on this. You have to take the work as a whole and also judge whether the work has political, artistic, literary, or scientific merits. And if you look at my work, Judy's work, the work of all of the other authors, almost all of them are award winners. So that in itself is saying this book has literary merits, artistic merits. And the book banners are trying to use passages to attack these books and attack basically just our freedoms to read and write in this country and to be a literate country that can access accurate information about the world that we live in and the people who live in it.
Actually,
Well,
can I also
go.
add one other thing? And that's that the rationale of these parents is that they are trying to protect the children, when in reality, what they are doing are removing tools that are helping kids deal with an increasingly complex world. We have so much literature, studies, proof that books are ways for marginalized kids to be able to see themselves reflected in literature, and how much that helps a kid who feels marginalized. We also know that books are a safe way for a kid who has grown up in a very homogenous community to experience lives and thought patterns different from the ones they've grown up with. And when you start pulling these books off library shelves, off school library shelves, off classroom shelves, what you are doing is taking away resources from kids who need them. They're not protecting these kids, they're damaging them.
Hmm. So, Maya, with you, it's a double whammy because sometimes uh, there has been objections to the prose, but also the pictures. You're very frank in your description of your own journey of searching, and the pictures are visually frank. So, how do you respond to somebody saying, "Look, okay, I hear you. I think your story is valuable for many people to read, but did you really have to go there?"
The answer is that I did have to go there. I wanted to write this book so that the people who I know and who love me can understand where I'm coming from and that we can have a relationship based on authenticity and truth, and for the people who love me to be able to know me as a whole human person. And let me tell you, I knew my mom was going to read this book. I, in fact, sat next to my mom with early drafts of the book and read it sitting next to her. So I made the book as like thoughtful and as in many ways like circumspect as I could possibly be, knowing again, I'm going to sit next to my mother reading this book while also saying everything that I needed to say to get people to understand where I'm coming from. And like you said earlier, writers are we're so careful and thoughtful about this. We spend, believe me, months and sometimes years considering a passage or a word or a phrase, or in my case, one image. And I wanted to explain myself as clearly as possible. But pictures have power, and comic books are uniquely vulnerable to challenges. Comic books have been censored in this country since probably as long as I've been comic books, but especially since the 1950s, when there was the scare about comic books corrupting children and the Comics Code Authority was founded. Pictures have power, and I know that, which is part of why I use them.
Well, now let's talk about something I was not aware of until recently, and that's we've talked about the challenges and the outright bans. But now there's something else going on that adds to this: soft censorship.
Hmm.
And I am kind of gobsmacked about how much there may be that we actually don't know about. And what we mean by that is it's kind of a pre-censorship by people who might have otherwise supported your books being on their shelves. So let's say librarians just don't want to get into it, so they just remove them or hide them. We've had instances where other folks just walk in and rip off the books, and do some other kinds of things. That's happened as well. But the soft censorship of people who are in positions to, if not advocate for it, at least make it available, is as chilling, it seems to me, as the outright bans. And I'd love to get both of your responses. I'll start with you, Jodi.
Well, I mean, can you blame a teacher or a media specialist in Florida who knows that if something objectionable is found in their library, they're going to be slapped with a $5,000 fine and they may lose their license, their teaching license? And when there's no definition because of these very poorly worded parental consent laws about what actually is objectionable, you know, what are you going to do? You can understand how that person who is just trying to make a living or put food on the table for their own kids might say, I've got to protect myself. If someone finds this objectionable, I'm going to get rid of it before, I'm the one who's targeted. When you know that there are librarians who have themselves been targeted by these individuals for standing up for our books. I really think about librarians being on the front lines of a war right now. You begin to understand how they're going to want to try to protect themselves. And I think it's a numbers game. When you realize that Pen America, which is tracking these banned books, says that 10,000 individual titles last year were banned. Do you have any idea how many titles that is? You can start to see where it becomes so overwhelming for the teachers and the librarians in these states, where bans have taken hold, that they begin to think maybe it's not worth the battle. It's terrifying for us because they are our front lines of defense, but I also understand where they're coming from.
Maia?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that was just said and add that another of the goals of people who are banning books and challenging books is to create this culture of fear, this culture of silence, and that in general, probably most of the soft censorship, which is occurring both in libraries, where libraries are deciding maybe not to purchase a title in the first place, or bookstores that are deciding not to carry a title, schools that are, removing classic titles like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, or, To Kill a Mockingbird, books that have been read in America for decades. um, they're pulling them in hopes that they can prevent a future challenge because they don't think either their library, their bookstore, their school district, their classroom can handle the sort of cultural stress of a challenge. And sometimes, yes, the financial burdens of a challenge, especially if it leads to a lawsuit. So the soft censorship is often people trying to protect themselves. Like you said, it's teachers or librarians whose jobs might be on the line, especially in the more conservative states in this country. And sometimes what they think is, if I remove this one really controversial book, it means I can keep these other like titles that are flying a little bit more under the radar.
Mm.
And sometimes it's a librarian perhaps thinking like, I just need to make sure this library stays open, because these challenges in some states are escalating to attacks on library funding. And some libraries have closed, fully shuttered in this country. There are towns that no longer have a library because the citizens were so angry that their library carried my book in particular, that they decided it was better to not have a library at all than have a library that carried my book.
Mm.
I think it's worth saying too that most people seem to think when they hear the word book ban, they think, oh, it's not a ban because you can still buy it somewhere. There's a reason school libraries exist, because not all kids can buy a book or have the resources to even go to a public library. But public library challenges have increased 92% since 2023. And, what I think that means and what people need to be aware of is they're coming for your books too. You want to read The Fourth Wing, you want to read romantasy, romance, they're coming for that. That is what, quote, mature content is to these people. And they'll pull those off your public library shelves as well.
Yeah, every time a book is challenged, specifically in a public library or school library, it's the readers and children who are already the most disadvantaged who are impacted the most. It's the ones who don't have the financial means to purchase books, the ones who don't have parents or families who can take them to public libraries or bookstores, especially if they live in what's called a book desert, like a place that doesn't have good access to independent bookstores and libraries in their area. And it's like the most vulnerable, the most socioeconomic impacted young people who are being impacted the most by these challenges.
If you're just tuning in, this is our special edition of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley for Bookmark, the Under the Radar Book Club. My guests are two authors whose books are some of the most banned in the country: Jodi Picoult, author of 19 Minutes, and Maia Kobabe, author of Gender Queer. This episode is also our August installment of Unbound Pages, our year-long series examining the anti-book banning movement in America. And speaking of the anti-book banning movement, what's happening in some areas, these are small efforts. People are specifically purchasing banned books, and then in some cases sending them to areas where they've been removed from shelves. There are some programs through libraries in certain states, including Massachusetts, where some people can, from other states where the books are not on the shelves, they can take them out from the library in Massachusetts through the system. So there are other efforts like this. There's some celebrity book ban clubs, all of that. Of course, there's series like ours. Still, my sense is people are not really aware of this, even as something that's going on or what it means more broadly. And I'd like you both to speak to that. Jodi, you can start.
So we know, again, plenty of surveys have shown this. More people in America do not support book bans than do support them. That's really important. And that goes across the entire political spectrum. And there have been, as you said, efforts like that. But there are also places like Tennessee, which passed a law saying that if publishers try to circumvent the book bans and send books directly to schools instead of having schools purchase them, they will be challenged and they will be fined and brought up on charges or whatever. So the states that are in the forefront of book banning are still trying to grasp at ways to make sure these books don't reach their shelves. We have seen states like Illinois, which was the first, and then Washington and Maryland and New Jersey and Minnesota and California have passed laws saying that there won't be, any more book bans. All these things are great. It's also been really important for publishers to join together in lawsuits against states and to have some positive feedback. I was part of a lawsuit in Iowa, and the judge found in our favor, and now it's back for appeal. It's I think when you say people don't seem to realize this is a real thing, it's because it hasn't happened to them yet. And I say yet because, like you mentioned, it is happening, even in a place like Massachusetts, even in places like California, where we tend to think these are progressive states. It still is happening in pockets of these communities. And one of the things that I always suggest when people say, well, what can I do? What difference can I make if I live in a place like Massachusetts? Well, one of the things that you can make sure you do is speak out about book bans, because when people say, oh, these aren't really bans, well, challenge that and explain why they are bans. Make sure that you run for school board, because we need people who are making decisions to keep books on shelves just as much as we need people, to combat the people who were saying books should be taken off shelves. Moms for Liberty got into power the way they did because they won something like 500 local school board elections in the year 2020. And we're still kind of regaining that ground, and we are starting to see that. But that's really, really, I think what needs to happen. It's the people who are unaffected who have to care before change happens. And
Yeah.
that's why it's important for people, even in states where they're not seeing rampant book banning, to codify that right now and to make sure that either their states are passing bills saying you can't ban books, or that they're getting into local politics to make sure that those books remain on the shelves, because it's a lot easier to protect a right than it is to get it when it's taken away.
Maya.
I would say in my life, almost every single person who is an author, an editor, a publisher, an agent, a librarian, and many people who are teachers are hearing about this. So if this is for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're joining us and knowing about this topic. And I would say if you are a listener who wants to know more, there are some great resources. There's a group called Authors Against Book Bans. If you are an author, editor, illustrator, or have ever had your name published in a book, you are welcome to join. There's also a publishing branch, Publishers Against Book Bans, if you are more of an editor, an agent, an industry person. And even if you aren't either of those things, you can follow Authors Against Books Bans on Instagram and Blue Sky to keep up with book banning news. There's also a wonderful journalist named Kelly Jensen who writes for Book Riot and also has a great newsletter that wraps up like book banning news around the country every like week or so. So there's a lot of ways to learn more about this, and you may be surprised that it is happening in your state, even if you live in, yes, a very what is considered a blue and progressive state, because it really is happening everywhere. And it also will affect all of us, even if you aren't an author or really consider yourself a reader, because the book bans are escalating into defunding libraries and attacking and weakening the trust in public education, which will impact every single person in this country. But yes, there is a growing movement to counter the book bans. And as Jodi said, there's been some real wins on the legislative front. Authors in Rhode Island and Colorado have helped write, advocate for, and shepherd anti-book banning bills that have both passed and been signed into law by their state governors, which has been really incredible for me as an author to watch other authors step up and step into the political sphere, frankly. It's been really inspiring.
So, with my last 30 seconds, would you say that you two are angry, um, uh, determined, hopeful? Where are you on the spectrum as the people making the content that is most targeted?
Furious and hopeful.
Jodi?
Apologetic. I think that there's a reason that we write the kinds of stories that we do. And there are people out there who need to hear them. And if there are other people standing in the way of that, I'm just going to plow them down.
Thank you so much for joining me today.